My name is Jeff Joseph. I'm the Senior Vice President of Communications with the Consumer Electronics Association. We're the organization that produces this outstanding show. I'm here this morning to interview my colleague and good friend, Dr. Shawn DuBravac. We refer to Shawn at CA as a true Renaissance man. Shawn's our chief economist. He's a widely cited technologist. He draws on his unique economic perspective and his market research background to forecast tech trends. He's a highly sought-after speaker on some of the top tech trends. He recently received his PhD. He's taught at George Mason University, at George Washington, University of Mary Washington. He's a devoted father and a huge baseball fan, and now he's an author. I don't know how the heck he had time to do all that, but it's amazing. Somehow in his limited free time, Shawn's authored our new book, Digital Destiny, How the New Age of Data Will Transform the Way We Work, Live, and Communicate. In the book, Shawn, he explains that the world's mass adoption of digital technologies portends the beginning of a new era for humanity. You can follow Shawn at Shawn DuBravac, and you can follow me at J.A. Joseph. And with that, Shawn, welcome to the CA stage.
Thanks, Jeff. Good to be here.
Great to have you here. So first, tell me, what inspired you to write the book? What inspired you to write Digital Destiny?
So actually, it was 3 years ago when I was here at CES, and I noticed that there were a number of things coming together. And when I looked at those things coming together, it was a story that had to be told. I felt like we were at this inflection point where we were redefining the. Is this working? Oh, maybe I just
closer.
need to.
Yeah, there you go. A little closer.
Put it in my mouth. So we were redefining that future course. All these pieces that we'd been putting together for the last 40 or 50 years were finally coming together. So. I give the example of the printing press. 1450, the introduction of the printing press, forever changed the way we got things done, the way we communicated with each other, the type of things that we did in our free time. And that's what's happening today. But the difference is, rather than it being the printing press, it's digitization, it's connection, and then it's sensorization. We're embedding sensors in all of these objects that will forever then change the way we do these things.
So you talk about those trends, digitization, sensorization, connectivity. How do we arrive at this point? You talk in a little bit about that shift from analog to digital to where we are. Can you just sort of give us some context and background?
Yeah, sure. So I talk just really briefly in passing about what I call the 5 pillars of digital data. It's ubiquitous computing, and we started to introduce digital computing in the 40s. It's all about inexpensive, cheap digital storage, and that was really a story of the 80s and 90s. And then it's these 3 things. It's the digitization of devices. That really started, well, first in 1981 with the introduction of the CD player here at CES, but where we really saw the explosion, the proliferation of these devices was 1998 when we sold the first digital television. And then after that point, we started to digitize primarily devices. First the television, 2003, BlackBerry introduced the smartphone. We started to digitize the mobile phone. We started to digitize the MP3 player with the introduction of MP3 players, the iPod. We started to digitize cameras. And slowly but surely, we replaced these analog products with their digital counterparts. We then began to connect them and embed sensors into them. 2007, we saw the introduction of the iPhone with the embedding of accelerometers, eventually gyroscopes, other sensors started to take over. 2006, we had the Nintendo Wiimote, which using accelerometers allowed us to essentially digitize the physical space. So we were able to monitor movement and motion and then digitize that, make that part of the experience. So we really started to blur the physical space and the digital space. Prior to 2006, we were using accelerometers and we were using these other sensors, but they were mostly doing things in the background. We used them to deploy airbags. We used them to save hard drives. In the chance that we might drop our laptop, they would lock up the hard drive so we wouldn't lose our data. We were using them, but it was all happening in the background. 2006 and 2007, we moved them to the foreground, where we really started to interact with them, and it became part of that experience. And that blurring of what's happening in the physical space and what's happening in the digital space continues today.
Give some examples you've seen around CS of that sort of transformation and that blurring of lines.
Yeah, we're seeing it happen everywhere. And as the explosion of digital feeds into devices, we're really starting to see it everywhere. So for example, for the last 15 years, it was primarily, as I mentioned, a focus on devices. But now we're seeing it show up in everyday objects. We see it with baby onesies that are connected to the internet.
That's exactly what you need, right?
Right. Yeah, but we see it with baby bottles. We see it with pacifiers. We're digitizing that, that physical space. The baby onesie that I talk about had a digital microphone on it, so you could pick up whether the baby was crying. Right. It had a temperature sensor on it, digital, so that it could tell the temperature around the baby. It had accelerometers and gyroscopes on it, so it could monitor the baby's breathing, whether it was awake, whether it was asleep, on its stomach, on its back. So you start to digitize all of these things, and then you tie it into other systems. One of the things I've seen this year at CES, kind of continuing on with the baby theme, is from a company called Naptime, which will, they're bracelets that you would wear, and based upon a pre-established schedule, when the monitor picks up that the baby is crying, it will wake up one of the spouses as opposed to both of the spouses. So based upon who's wearing the wristband and the predefined schedule.
Is there a device that helps determine who gets to wear, like how you negotiate, navigate that terrain?
That's one, next.
Yeah. Right, that's the digitization of the impossible, I guess, at some point. But yeah, I sort of joked about the baby stuff, but as we've discussed, one of the cool things about this trend is this proliferation of devices and services that are more individualized, right? So while I may joke about that could be a really great solution for, obviously, someone who's a new parent. So as we look at sort of these strange bedfellows, as you will, this blurring of lines, even as you look around the show floor, can you discuss a little bit about some of the strange bedfellows that you've seen and some of that convergence that comes through this digitization, sensorization, and connectivity?
Yeah, we're definitely moving into an environment that I like to refer to as an internet of me. So it's becoming very focused on the individual. And we already see that starting to take hold as we digitize all of these different experiences. So we look at communication, and communication becomes very unique between individuals when you start to use things like emojis. We see devices that allow you to send different metrics to an individual. And so those are very personal metrics. Maybe it's your heartbeat, maybe it's something else. And so they can start to monitor something that's very unique between the two of you. And that continues on, so we start to see really a fragmentation, what I call a fragmentation of innovation, as these things start to show up in more places. It's not a story anymore just about devices. It's a story about everything around us. And then the big question then becomes, how do these tie in together? So for example, Jawbone with their Jawbone Up measures how many steps you have, but they tie in with Uber, so they can also then measure how many steps you didn't take because you took that Uber. Not only are we measuring the data that exists, we're starting to measure the data that didn't exist, but might have, could have, had you made different choices.
You talked a bit this morning at the keynote, and we've talked, and it's in the book, about the predictability piece of this, and how that improves the more data that you gather. You gave the Netflix example this morning. Maybe you can repeat that or give some other examples of that other trend.
Yeah, so right now we do a great job of capturing the data and looking at it from a historical situation. How many steps did we take? What's our blood pressure been? But we don't look at things moving forward. We don't predict things moving forward. So the Netflix example I give is that if Netflix today, which uses basic algorithm to decide what to offer you based upon what you've watched, if they had access to other data, so for example, a drop cam, they could see how many people are in the room, or my wearable that could tell them how stressed I am, how excited I am, or maybe the thermostat, which would tell them how cold it is, they could start to make more predictive recommendations that deviate from my historical pattern. So they could look and say, hey, we see that Shawn's alone. It's dark, he's lying down, he's depressed because of his wearable. We could see that it's cold. Let's offer him this, in the movie I always throw out, there's this Nicholas Sparks movie, because this is a movie that he might not normally like, and his viewer history doesn't suggest that he would like it, but all of these other situations have always, correlated well with the showing of this movie. And I think that type of environment will change. Intel paints the story of sitting in a chair and it predicting that you're going to get sick 3 days from now.
Right.
I think you'll see more of that. The data is there now, and that we're digitizing it, we're capturing it in a systematic way, and it has massive implications.
Right. Throughout the book, you sort of give these human qualities to data a bit, and part of the theme is this collection of data and that becomes actionable and it improves our ability to predict and whatnot. But along with that comes a lot of risks, right? So there's the obvious, the big elephant in the room is the security and privacy, and particularly given recent events with our friends at Sony. How do our companies addressing that issue of privacy and security? And Shawn, who has the ultimate responsibility? Is it the responsibility of the consumer, the individual? Is it the responsibility of the device manufacturer, the service provider?
Clearly, security is a key issue. As I was writing the book and finishing the book this year, I felt like I was constantly updating it with the newest hack, because every week there was a new hack that was bigger, and so I was constantly updating it. And companies care tremendously about the security, and they also recognize that the value of the data is in all of the different things it can inform and empower. And so they're trying to put that back into the hands of the consumer, really allowing the consumers to use that data, move it into different services, move it into different applications. I think today companies are struggling with how much do I tell the customer about themselves? Yeah. So for example, if I have a wearable device on that measures my steps, or more importantly, if my mom has a wearable device on that measures her steps, I get a sense of her natural everyday activity levels. So if all of a sudden I see a deviation from that, maybe she normally walks 5,000 steps, and the last couple of days she's only walked 1,000 steps, that could be a sign that something's wrong. She's hurt, but she hasn't called me. She hasn't gone and seen the doctor. Knowing my mom, she's one that doesn't want to go see somebody. She's active, but she doesn't want to go, she doesn't want to trouble somebody, she doesn't want to go to the doctor. But these little things can start to say, hey, this person might be injured, not enough that they felt like they had to go to the hospital, but enough that it's impacting their daily activity levels. Maybe you should check in on them. So I think that information is available to us today. Companies are trying to figure out how much do consumers really want to know about themselves. Do we really want to move into that predictive environment where we start to really tell the consumer things about them that they might not have even known? I think that's where we're going. So Twitter's a great example. Twitter allows advertisers to advertise based upon gender. But here's the really interesting thing. Twitter never asks their user to identify gender. So they're using digital data to define gender. Right. Something that we used to define through anatomy is now being defined by the words that we use or other things like that. Literally, the digitization of these experiences is changing the way we define something as common as gender.
That opens up a whole host of questions. Digital sexism, I don't know what you tell. But so that's one part of it. I think your point about what we choose to share, or what we want to know rather. But the other part of it is these devices share information between each other, because that's kind of the power of this ultimately, is that uber connectivity. But that goes back to that fundamental issue of privacy, which is a little different from, I can choose what I want to know, maybe I have power over that, but how do I have power to choose what then is shared and the benefits that I then receive from that sharing?
Yeah, the companies definitely want to empower the individual to be able to port that information, use that information, tie it into other systems. And so I think that's the experimentation that's taking place today here at CES and in the years to come. I think we're entering a period of experimentation over the next 5 or 6 years. No longer are we looking at, is this technologically possible? Is it technologically feasible? Now we're asking questions around, is this technologically meaningful? Should we connect this device? How do we connect this device? What type of data do we capture, meaning what type of sensors do we deploy? So every object that we see getting connected, digitized, sensorized at the show floor today is asking these much broader questions. When I look at the smartwatch, I look at the fundamental question of, does the internet make sense on our wrist? Because that's really what we're asking. And if it does make sense on our wrist, what are the type of services that we would want to have? What are the type of activities that we would want to track or engage in? You know, you look at some companies, they say payments is the right thing. Others look at health and fitness applications. They're all exploring different aspects of the same fundamental question. What does the internet look like on the wrist, and is it meaningful? Now carry that on as we go from billions of devices to, we've got 2 billion smartphones, 1.7 billion computers worldwide. We're moving into an environment where we're going to have 50, 60, 70 billion connected objects. By some estimates, only about 4% of everything that will be connected, that could be connected, is today connected.
Outstanding.
So as we start to connect all those things, what is the broader story? What becomes the bigger picture? Where should the internet be deployed? So maybe, it makes sense on the wrist for certain applications, but it also could make sense in the shoes, on the chairs, on the table,
toothbrush?
in the lighting, in the toothbrush. All of that is experimentation that's taking place today. And the implications spill over into every aspect of what we do, how we communicate, how we live, the jobs that we do. When we talk about the toothbrush, and I love to point out that the dentist of the future could easily become a data scientist first, wanting to review your toothbrush data. And now all of a sudden, if you take that toothbrush data and you tie it into your calendar, you could start to predict that, hey, you didn't sleep very well today or last night, which means you're going to brush your teeth 20% less efficiently this morning. They notify you of that, they alert you of that, or they do things that help you overcome these things in your past, decisions you made in the past. I look at services like Waze, which measure traffic activities. If I could tie that into my calendar and tie that into my wearable device, all of that then could look and say, hey, we see that you're really stressed out during your commute. If you left 5 minutes later today, you would avoid this massive congestion. You wouldn't get to your destination much later, and you'd be much less stressed out.
Right.
Over time, I think we're going to start to let, as the communication between devices improves, we're going to let devices do these things on our behalf. So for example, our calendars may see that we're both stressed out and reschedule meetings on our behalf. They'll see that it's a low priority meeting, and they'll move it to a later time, another day, based upon other things that we have going on.
It's amazing, and I love the dentist example, and it's throughout your book. You sort of talk about the transformative implications of all these trends. They're not just about the devices themselves, but all the sort of ancillary services and products and industries that are engaged. I think it's wonderful. Yeah, it's so fun to hear you talk, and as we've discussed this book from the beginning, I think of you as sort of like Dr. Seuss's Lorax. He speaks for the trees, you speak for the internet, but not everyone is as bullish. We'll have Andrew Keen here later this week, who sort of takes a different view of the internet, and he talks about how the internet is sort of given rise to sort of a debasing of culture, increased inequality, increased economic inequality. How do you respond to these criticisms and concerns about connectivity, whether it's from the privacy side, whether it's sort of giving rise to the lesser angels of our nature, and some of these those efficiencies that we all applaud also mean job loss. So how do you balance that out?
So when we look at innovation, we notice a few things. One, it's always changing, and two, it's always disruptive, right? And so when we embrace those and recognize those, then you see that we're really progressing along a continuum. It's an evolutionary path. I look at the evolution of the internet, for example. It started on the browser, and what was the home page when it was the browser? It was really something like Yahoo. Right. There were very few options. We went to Yahoo. We consumed a lot of information there, and the metrics in 1995 were focused on how long are people staying on this site. That's what the internet cared about at the time. Then with the explosion of websites, that single landing page wasn't the right homepage anymore. So we started to use things like Google as the homepage to figure out all of the options available to us on the web. A further explosion caused further change. So we start to move to things like Reddit, which are curating for us. So now we're moving in an environment where we've got, say, 5 billion objects connected to the internet to one where there's 50 billion objects connected to the internet. And again, the homepage of the internet is changing. I think that's happening now. So when I look at this change that's settling in, what I see is data wants to be organized. There's this move towards, and certainly we want it to be organized, but I think it also naturally moves in that direction. And at the same time, as it explodes, it creates chaos. So we move in this cycle of organization, then chaos, then organization. And you see that in the history of the internet. Lots of different information out there, so we organize it on the internet through something like Yahoo. We explode the number of websites, there's chaos, and then we organize it again through something like Google or Bing or Yahoo Search. A further explosion causes further chaos, and we start to organize it through curation. So we go through this ever-ending cycle of chaos, organization, chaos, and organization. I think that cycle will continue and will be the storyline for innovation and technology in years to come.
Scares out a heck of some existing businesses, legacy businesses, but ultimately technological innovation resolves some of these issues, comes to the rescue, creates that sense of order. So it's a very exciting future, a lot of opportunities, a lot of possibility out there. What do you see as the impediments to this digital destiny you describe?
So I think right now I go back to the fact that we're in this period of experimentation. We're no longer is it a technological hurdle to connect these devices. Now the question is, we can do it, should we do it? How do we do it? What's the right communication protocol? Is it Bluetooth, is it Wi-Fi, is it cellular, is it NFC? Once we figure those types of questions out, I think those are the hurdles before us. We know a lot about you. How much do we really want to tell you? How much do we really want to know? So, if my trackers know how excited I am or how depressed I am, do I want that to inform every decision? And I think those are the questions that we're dealing with today. Those are the hurdles. Not can it be done, but where should it be done? And then what the use case scenario looks like. And that's where that experimentation comes in. So a lot of what you see at CES, 20,000 products launching this week, it's all about experimenting with that use case scenario. And I think we're going to stumble upon and we're going to have this serendipitous discovery of some amazing use case scenarios. And that's really what the book explores, is where these things could go. There's a democratizing force behind technology, behind the internet, and it's certainly behind all of what's coming over the next decade.
We just have another minute or two left here. So we both have relatively young kids. So you think about this coming destiny and these changes. When they're sitting here 20 years from now and my daughter's interviewing your son, what are they going to be talking about? What's going to be what the implications of what we're discussing today? What are they going to be discussing in 20 years?
So it's funny. My youngest son's 7. He came into my office while I was working on the book, and he said, what are you writing about, Dad? And I said, I'm writing about your future. He gets excited, and he runs out, and I hear him screaming to his brother, "Hey guys, come quick, Dad's got a time machine." And it took him a little while to realize that, and then he came back to me a couple of days later, and he said, "Dad, I realize when you talk about writing about the future, you're writing about what the future might look like,
right. Not actually what it's going to be.
Not what it actually looks, what it actually is." I think what they're going to do is take digital data as given, and I feel like we're already there today. So 15 years ago, I look at the Malaysian airliner that disappeared in 2014. 15 years ago, that happens, and we talk about how unfortunate it would have been, that technology wasn't used, that there's these new technologies like GPS and that it wasn't used. That's not the storyline that we talk about in 2014. The storyline we talk about then is, how is this possible? How is it that there isn't GPS deployed on 60 different objects inside of that plane and that we know its exact coordinates at all times? How is it possible with the proliferation of all of these technologies that we don't know exactly where it is? So that dialogue has shifted, where the technological capabilities are given, and now the next question is the application. And so I think that same thing will be happening. I think they'll be talking about predictability. I think they'll be talking about what are the next things that we want to predict. And ultimately, they'll become part of our culture of what do we not want to predict? What do we want to leave up to serendipitous discovery? I believe it was, and I can't remember the name exactly, maybe McEnroe, one of the famous tennis players. There's a scene, one of his winning matches from, one of his winning matches. He's never watched it. He's never seen the video because he wants to remember it,
be in the moment,
the way it was, the way it felt when he won it. I think we'll start to control that, and I already see that happening with my kids. I see, us as adults struggling with how do we blur and how do we blend what's happening in the physical space with the digital space. And that's where, we're always holding onto our iPhones, we're always checking our phones. It's because we're still in that exploration of how do we blur this. I look at my kids and they toggle between the physical space and the digital space in a much more seamless way.
Right.
They'll just move, it becomes part of the dialogue. They'll be talking, the next thing they know, they're playing a YouTube video, and then they're going back to talking. It's a seamless experience for them where they're toggling between the two. For them, there's significantly less blurring because it just is. And I think that's what happens. So today, we talk about the Internet of Things. I think in 15 years, it will just be the Internet.
The Internet, right.
We used to talk about the mobile web. We don't talk about the mobile web anymore. It's just the
Just
web.
is, yeah.
It's just the internet. And so I think we're going to continue to make that progression. So in 15, 20 years, when they're here having this conversation, it will be about the internet, and it will be about the future that is, given the technology that was.
Outstanding. Well, thank you, Shawn. Thanks for your time. Again, the book, Digital Destiny, How the New Age of Data Will Transform the Way We Work, Live, and Communicate. You'll be doing a signing across the hall, I believe?
Yes.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. At Shawn DuBravac, at J. Joseph. Thank you very much. Have
Thanks,
a great
everyone.
CS, and stay tuned for the next author interview. Thank you.